Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. I'm Max Hayes, your host, and for this Q&A special, we'll be with you for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so to discuss all the questions that we put out on Twitter that you have sent us, and fingers crossed for a little bit of positivity after Forest lose to Spurs 2-0 on Friday night. Of course, Brennan Johnson's return under the lights ended up with Spurs being down to 10 men, but Forest couldn't really capitalise on that. Ended up losing the game 2-0 with more pressure mounting on Steve Cooper than ever ahead of the busy Christmas period. To discuss all of that and more, we're joined by Forest journalist and, of course, podcast regular, Sarah Clapson. Sarah, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, Max. Good, thank you.
Good. Ready for Christmas?
No. It's creeping up too quick.
Dave, have you done all your Christmas shopping?
Yeah, lots of vouchers, mate. Really unimaginative stuff. And but why do I give the freedom of choice? So, as you say, Christmas for me is how can I get up in time to get to Newcastle? That's my big issue.
I think that's a lot of question on the Forest fans' mind at the minute, is that awful 12:30 kickoff on Boxing Day. Also joining us from the neutral camp today is Dan Bardell, sports broadcaster, often seen on Sky Sports and TalkSport. Dan, good to see you. Podcast debut, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Obviously, I'm the opposite end of the spectrum to Forest fans at the moment. Very much enjoying football. So I hope I'll come here, and obviously I'm in a good mood. But I feel for Forest fans because it's never nice when you're struggling.
No, it isn't. It isn't indeed. And we'll get straight into it. Really, a bit of a Q&A special today, and we'll just start with kind of a list of questions, and we'll put them to the panel. Thanks for all your questions as well. Thanks for getting involved on Garibaldi Red _ on Twitter. Right, let's start. Sarah, let's start with you. This question comes from at Laith Garibaldi on Twitter. He says, aside from deciding on Cooper's future, what do the panel think is the most important role or area in the club that needs sorting off the pitch so we can try to continue to make progress and get out of this rot?
What a question that is for the first one.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's great.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, thanks for springing that. The biggest thing, and it's not necessarily easy to do, is stability. I know that's kind of it's not really a tangible, but it's having something solid in terms of personnel, not just on the pitch, not just in terms of the manager, but around the whole club. Because uncertainty and constant flux, constant change, which is what Forest have had really for a while since the summer, it's not good. It isn't the be-all and end-all when it comes to performances and results on the pitch, but it doesn't help. There have been a lot of personnel changes, ones that people perhaps wouldn't necessarily notice and see. So in terms of maybe physio department, analysis department, all things like that, it all adds up, and it all just creates a bit of uncertainty and a bit of a lack of stability, which is so vital. We've seen what it does in terms of transfers with constant changes of ins and outs. And it's not necessarily something that's easy to fix. But I think it would really help if Forest just managed to have a period of stability. And obviously we've got that uncertainty over the manager at the minute, which just adds to that. So that would be my thoughts really on something that Forest could really do with sorting out.
Yeah, Dan, and just picking up on the back of Sarah's answer there, Dan. I mean, stability's talked about in football clubs a lot, and from kind of an outsider point of view, with Forest trying to almost continue to make that stability with Steve Cooper, that they've had a manager now for over 2 years. But at what point did the club actually go, hang on a minute, you can't get stability when the team's kind of losing games constantly? And it's a phrase that's talked about in football a lot, isn't it?
Yes, look, stability is massive. Having a cohesive unit and everyone pulling in the same direction at a football club is massive as well. Successful teams often have the whole football club aligned, and it feels like everyone's pulling in the same direction. Forest have never really had that since they returned to the Premier League. It's kind of felt like a bit of a mishmash, different things going on in different places, not sure who's making decisions in certain places. And I'm not surprised that Forest are struggling. It kind of always has felt to me that just as Forest get some kind of momentum and you feel like things are going okay, they'll change something, or they'll buy another 5-6 players and throw it all into the mix. And I just feel that at the moment with Forest, they're probably about where I would expect them to be. I don't think Forest will go down. I mean, we'll come on to the manager. Obviously, I think the manager's been a big part, actually, of what's good about Nottingham Forest. And without him, I think Forest probably do go down. Last season, I think he did a really, really underrated job. But I just think it's not just on the pitch. It is off the pitch, like Sarah said. It feels like every month or every few weeks, something will change. And for a football club to be successful, I don't really think that you can operate in that manner. You don't see many successful clubs doing what Forest do on a weekly or monthly basis.
Interesting point there. We'll go on to the next question. And Dave, this one for you, actually. I was speaking to you after the game on Friday, and you kind of voiced your concerns to me about the recruitment with Forest. Christian asks on Twitter, who is exactly running the club on a day-to-day basis? Dane Murphy was never replaced as CEO, but there are several people in senior positions on the club website. Is it Marinakis Jr.? Now, this is a question that's talked about a lot, Dave, on Twitter. Who's actually making the decisions at Forest? We know that Marinakis' son is involved. That's Miltiades. And as well as Ross Wilson, who's now the recruitment officer, chief footballing officer. And there's lots of other people involved. But Dave, kind of going from that question as well into recruitment, what have you made to the signings? And as Christian asks, who do you think actually is running the football club on a day-to-day basis?
Well, to take the two parts separately, Max, if you listen to Sarah's excellent answer and you listen to Dan's answer, they are kind of, giving the feeling that there isn't one defining force within the club that's like bringing it all together. To the outside world, it looks like it would be Steve Cooper, but I think there are several people who are kind of dipping their fingers into the pies, and we could do without that. So there is a lack of stability, I think. I think our lack of stability goes right back to 5 loan signings in the Championship. If those players had been our own rather than loans, we wouldn't have had to sign so many. And from that point onwards, it's been a tumble dryer of players in and out. And it's going to, I actually feel it's going to carry on through January, because my view is, and certainly sat there in the Trent End on Friday night, I've always had my suspicions about the quality of the recruitment and the quality of the players that's been brought in. I felt early on in the season, some people were getting ahead of themselves. Forest will be all right. Forest will be mid-table. Forest will be 12th, 13th, 14th. And I'm like, I want to see it on the pitch. And I sat there on Friday night and thought to myself, as I walked out the ground, I thought this squad is not good enough to stay in this league. The gulf between Tottenham Hotspur and Nottingham Forest was almost frightening. We are so poor at keeping the ball. We are the worst. I actually think we're the worst team in the division at ball retention. How many games since we've got promoted have Forest dominated possession? Hardly any. How many times has a Forest? I can only recount Liverpool at home last year as the only time a Forest midfield has dominated another midfield since we got promotion, and that was through brute force and ignorance rather than any kind of, subtle dissection of the opposition. I don't trust our goalkeepers, either of them. Moan at Steve Cooper all you like, but he can't clear the ball for Matt Turner. And Vlachodimos has not impressed me either. Our wide guys are trying hard, but they're showing to me why they were peripheral at the clubs that they were at before they came to Nottingham Forest. Our defence, there've been some good performances in there, but if you let 5 in at Fulham and you give away goals like we did on Friday night, then you're not doing your job. I just feel that we're not good enough to stay up at the moment, and I've never been fully convinced. I've had lots of people saying this is a Premier League quality squad. Well, not enough of them are putting a run of consecutive credible performances together. At the moment, I would suggest that Harry Toffolo is the most consistent performer in our squad. A lad who's had serious personal issues to deal with, and he's showing the strength of character to do it. He's becoming, on the quiet, a little bit of a cult hero, Harry Toffolo. Nico Williams has come back in. In fact, our 2 fullbacks since the Fulham debacle have been our best players, both of them. Murillo has only been playing professional football for about a year, 18 months. I think he's a recruitment success. Oral Mangala, I think, has been pretty consistent, but I want Oral to dominate a midfield. I want Oral to open a defence up. We don't do it. We don't have a player that we can give the ball in the midfield and he sets the tempo, not only for us, but against an opposition. And I just feel that we're a relatively beige outfit at the moment, and it needs to be different. Our strikers, if we're looking at recruitment, successes have been Taiwo, Wonyi and Murillo, right? And Taiwo, actually the best player in the club in many ways at the moment is the one who's not in the side, Taiwo. He's our best player. And the fact that he's not there is showing the deficiencies elsewhere. I'm afraid I do not see Chris Wood as being the answer. Smashing lad, tries hard, but I think, and this might sound cruel, I like to former years. Divock Origi the same. Now, add to that, I don't see any really exciting youngsters coming through from the academy. Back in the day, we had Brennan Johnson and we had Ryan Yates coming through. And you take Yatesy. Wolves and Tottenham couldn't fault the effort. Absolutely couldn't fault the effort. But effort will only take you so far. And I think that there's a distinct lack of Premier League quality in this squad. And I worry that some aren't good enough and some have reached their ceiling. And I don't think there's enough at the moment of a core of players to build that necessary stability on and off the field, to build around that. There isn't the kernel of stability that we need in this club. And my view walking out on Friday night was, if that side had gone to Kenilworth Road, Turf Moor or Bramall Lane the next day, it would have been beaten. And I've always felt, and I'm not being overly pessimistic or, gloomy in my outlook, I've always felt that the second season syndrome, where the novelty has gone from the crowd or the novelty has gone from the team, is going to be really, really difficult. And I said I wanted 17th and I still want 17th. I'm actually less convinced that we can get 17th now. So something has to change. I do think the manager is going to go soon. I love the guy, but I think a change is going to come. But my biggest fear actually was that you might change the manager, but is the quality of this side going to be improved therein? I'm not so sure. So I have grave reservations about the recruitment, Max, to be honest. And, the recruitment team that was brought in, if Ross Wilson was that great, he'd still be at Rangers. That's my view. So I have, sorry to name names and call people out, but at the moment, I do not see a Premier League quality squad play for Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, it's an interesting take, Dave. Remember, in the comment section on YouTube, you can always drop a comment of whether you agree or disagree with what we all say. Adrian Love on Twitter also asks, which leads us quite nicely onto this question, actually, Dave, your point. Adrian asks, what has the bigger effect, changing manager or getting reasonable Taiwo cover in January, obviously meaning a striker? Would a Lopetegui or a similar manager change with the behind-the-scenes circus on recruitment make a difference, or would we be handing Cooper a competitor better equipped given his future experience with us? Basically, obviously, I guess there, Sarah, probably a question that means, would it be worth changing manager when you've got a recruitment window coming up, you've got January transfer window coming up where you can get cover for Taiwo Awoniyi, and would it be unfair to get rid of Steve Cooper, get a new manager in, and then give them kind of a whole window for new players and a new squad?
It's such a difficult one to answer. I think if Awoniyi had been fit, I don't think Forest would be in the position that they're in. I think they would have more points than they've got currently. But equally, Steve Cooper has made some mistakes. He's got some things wrong in terms of tactics, in terms of substitutions. He's not. It's so difficult to decide whether he's getting the most out of the players or whether the players are, or I think they are letting him down to an extent with some of the performances, but would a different manager get more out of that group? It's such a difficult one to call. And nobody can predict either way. Nobody knows for certain what would happen. I think there's probably a bit of both. I think Steve Cooper needs to get more out of the group, but players also need to step up. And as Dave mentioned, some of the players that have been brought in haven't had the desired impact. So the point that Dave was making about controlling a midfield, that was what Sangare was brought in for. That was his role. He's been pretty disappointing so far. I think he showed He's shown flashes, he's shown glimpses. He was starting to find his feet a little bit, but still not to the extent where we were thinking he's running the show here. He's absolutely got a grip on this midfield. You'd like to think that with time that will come, as we've seen with Mangala, as we've seen with Awoniyi. But Forest need it now. Forest need somebody to step up now and put in those kind of performances. They need players to really up their game. The problem they've got at the minute is the people or the players that are performing best are Nico Williams and Ryan Yates. They're keeping out the likes of Sangare and Dominguez and Olorena and the players that have been brought in the summer. And can you change that now? Probably not, because they're the players that are performing best, and that the system that Steve Cooper has picked, Nico Williams can't play in a back four. He has to play as a wing back. So in that sense, he's kind of tied at the minute. How he fixes that, I don't know, because you can't, long term, you can't leave out the likes of Sangare and Dominguez when the owner has spent a lot of money bringing those kind of players in. It's a massive headache. I don't know how he solves it. It's a tricky one. I think probably I've rambled on a little bit, but I don't think there's an obvious answer to the question. I think it's such an unknown.
Yeah.
And trying to predict what will happen is anybody's guess.
It's very hard. And Dan, from somebody that's kind of watched Forest this season and saw them last season, are you shocked at the difference in quality on the pitch? And a lot of people will say that on paper this squad is actually good enough, but as Dave so eloquently said earlier, that it actually isn't sometimes, and that the likes of Sangare should be performing more. And I think that's the difficult thing with Forest at the minute, is this squad actually looks okay on paper, but it just seems like players aren't performing.
I would say that this is a side that I would have expected to be in a relegation battle. I just think with the turnover of players, I feel that it's unavoidable that Forest aren't going to be in a relegation dogfight. You have to give players time, but it's hard when you're buying so many players every window. And like you say, you need Forest to be good now. Awoniyi's injured at the moment. That's a blow, because he is your goal scorer, and probably within the Forest squad, he's irreplaceable. So Steve Cooper's operating without him, and he's operating without Brennan Johnson, who was a massive part of what was good about Forest last season. That front three of Gibbs White, Brennan Johnson and Awoniyi, that's not there now. So he's kind of trying to find the right kind of formula, the right kind of mix up front, and I don't think Steve Cooper's found that. You've gone from having Navas and Henderson to having Turner and Blasher-Demos. Now that's a huge downgrade in goal. Yeah. There's no other way around that than that's a downgrade in goal. And I thought all season when I've watched Turner, he struggled. I mean, I was at the Forest game when they beat Villa, and Blasher-Demos wasn't really tested. I haven't seen as much of him as I have of Turner, but I think the goalkeeper positions are a concern. And then I think up top, without Awoniyi, that there's not the goals. And then Dave and Sarah have kind of said that in the middle of the park, there isn't that ball playing player. But I feel sorry for Steve Cooper, because I feel like he's getting given players. They're not necessarily players that he wants to sign. If he'd have wanted Origi'd be playing, but he's not playing, which says to me that's not a Steve Cooper signing. So I feel like Steve Cooper is operating with one hand tied behind his back. And on the managerial front, I think making a change is hugely risky for Forest. I know Lopetegui's been spending a lot of time in the UK. He's kind of been hanging around here, like waiting for something to happen. But if I look at that Nottingham Forest squad and I think, who is that squad better suited for, Steve Cooper or Lopetegui? I would say Steve Cooper, because Lopetegui came into Wolves. There's a lot of technical players within that Wolves squad at the time. You know, Moutinho and Neves were there, plus the players that are there now. And there was kind of the basis of a Lopetegui side. Lopetegui is a volatile character as well. You know, I think he comes into Forest, sees the way they operate, players thrown in front of him that he doesn't necessarily want. That guy could walk, and then you just create an absolute mayhem and chaos, which has been what's happened to Forest since they returned to the Premier League. Steve Cooper did unbelievably to keep Forest up last season. So I just think there's so many things going on. I would look at that league table and think, realistically, who do Forest fans expect to be ahead of there, other than maybe Bournemouth and Fulham, who are kind of pushing towards mid-table? Forest are about where I'd say that I'd expect them to be.
Yeah, and ahead of that kind of Christmas period, Forest just sitting outside the relegation zone after Everton picking up points with their 10-point deduction. That leads us quite nicely into a question, Dave. JS Gerlin asks on Twitter, is a new striker or a new goalkeeper the absolute priority in January? I think so, Dave.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. If you can't score a goal, then you can't be competitive. If you can't keep them out, you can't be competitive. All good sides are built on clean sheets. All good sides. I don't know if you know, there's a chap who used to manage us, used to say that. He was asked when they won the league in 77, 78. He said, we signed Shilton and we took off. And Brian Moore asked him in an interview, so he won the league. Him and the back four. That's what Brian said. And until you...
It's a very good impression, Forrest, Dave.
It's an average one. I've had a cough sweet this morning, Max. That's what it is. But the thing is, I mean, my view on the goalkeepers, like, Dan's looking from outside the fence, right? And looking at Dan, I kind of think, you know what? The Villa are romping away at the moment. We beat the Villa, But actually, since that game, Villa have gone in one direction and Forest have gone in another. And if you like, at the moment, our wins are almost outliers to the plateau of kind of performance that we're on. The goalkeeping situation, I think back to Keylor Navas, I think back to Dean. I saw Dean playing for Crystal Palace this weekend at the Etihad and what good work Dean did. And I'm thinking of Brees. And we've been spoiled a little bit now in hindsight with our goalkeepers. These two, Matt Turner had a decent start to the season, but then has kind of tailed off. Oddie came in with a big reputation, having played every game for Benfica last year, but I think there have been goals that we've conceded. I thought he could have stopped Dwight McNeil's goal for Everton against us. When I look back at it at a different angle, I don't trust either of them. In fact, maybe against Bournemouth on Saturday, I'm saying Big Wayne. Give Big Wayne the gloves. Let him go. He can't be any worse. And as for up front, at the moment, if you ask me honestly, where our next win is coming from, I don't see it. I mean, Bournemouth, could Forest go to Manchester United and win 3-0 with this squad? No, Bournemouth have just done that. You know what I mean? So I think Bournemouth are a level above us. Newcastle, even though they've got like 600 in the casualty unit at the moment, have probably got a squad good enough to beat us. United, who come next on the 30th at tea time. I was kind of watching them yesterday to see, are there any chinks in them? And like, whatever you say about United and the chaos there, they still got a point at Anfield, which nobody has done this season. So I do not see where our next win is coming from, and I do not see where our next goal is coming from, and I do not see where our next clean sheet is coming from. So to answer J.S. Gerlin's extremely incisive question, a goalkeeper and a striker of some description, absolute necessities. And the stability issue, or sort of the instability issue, because that's really what it is, isn't going to stop in January, because we've got so many holes in our squad that need filling. It could go on and on and on. It may get to the point where, Fulham, if you look at Fulham, right, Fulham had we're up one season, down the next, up one season, down the next, before they finally settle. And Forest may have to go through a period like that. But a goalkeeper we all trust. I mean, a guy said to me, why don't we go and get David De Gea? And at the moment, David De Gea wouldn't be a bad shout for us compared to what we've got. And as for a striker, I watched our kids at Accrington a month or so ago, and they play some lovely football. And it would be nice to think that one of those could come through, a Julian Larson or a Natif Kanate, somebody like that. But unfortunately, the gulf between that and what we need in the Premier, if you like, in a way, Forest have almost gone too far too quickly. And it's caught up with them a bit. From the bottom of the Championship to where we are now. I mean, it's an incredible progression, but it's almost like it went up so quickly. There's a sort of a leveling off period, and there's some pain involved now in what we're going to do. But yeah, I've rambled on a bit, as is my want. But goalkeeper and somebody who can put the ball in the back of the net, absolute necessities.
Indeed, of course, fingers crossed that Forest will get someone like that through the door, Dave. But Sarah, in terms of, as Dave mentioned there, kind of about Bournemouth and Fulham, the two teams that came up with Forest last season, all three of us surviving. But the worrying sign for me, kind of looking at Forest, is that Bournemouth and Fulham kind of rising up the table, and Fulham, I mean, managed to put 5 past us. And then you look at Bournemouth and under a new manager, they're thriving. And Forest seem to be having that second season syndrome, similar to Leeds last season. And that is a concern, isn't it? That the other teams around us that you would think would be near us, whether that would be near the relegation zone or, as kind of Dan was saying there, kind of just about realistically finishing 17th, are picking up points. And that's the worrying thing for Forest. And even the bottom 3 are as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Forest are on heading in one direction, and other teams around them are in the opposite in terms of form. What I would say is that can quickly change. We saw that last season. Any team, and there's a lot that are in and around it at the bottom, go up and down. Nobody, I mean, if you're on an upward curve, then you soon get out of it. If that continues over a course of a season, but most teams that are in a relegation scrap will go through peaks and troughs and ups and downs and all kinds of twists and turns. We saw that last season. Forest are right in the thick of it though, and that is the worrying thing. They need to find a win somewhere. They need to find some point from somewhere. As we said, looking at the fixture list, it's not easy at the moment to see where that comes from. But surprise results happen. The Villa result, for instance, I don't think too many people would have predicted that. Forest got the win. We hoped it was kind of a starting point and a building block, same as the point at Molineux, something to build on. It's just getting it. And that's kind of why Steve Cooper's gone back to basics really at the minute in terms of setup, in terms of how he's playing, in terms of this low block and trying to be hard to beat. He's done it out of necessity. He's just trying to get some kind of result anyway, anyhow, and hoping that there's something to then build on and start to get back to what he wants to do. But it's not easy. And Christmas fixture list is always important. It looks like it's going to be particularly important at the minute. Because a lot can change in a small space of time.
Looking at the Christmas fixture list for Forest, it doesn't make nice reading. And Jordan's asked a very good question on Twitter. Forget the last 2 years, just go from what we are seeing. Do you believe that Cooper will turn it round? And from your point of view, you've seen Cooper turn it round last season. He was under kind of the pressure for kind of not once, but twice, and was publicly backed by the owner with a contract and with a statement saying that they're going to be behind him. Do you think Cooper's still got enough about him to turn it round, Dan, for Forest?
I think he would, and I believe Steve Cooper would keep Nottingham Forest up, but I'm not sure he'll get the chance. I think, I can't remember who just said it, but the promoted teams are starting to pick up points here and there, and it's kind of felt like all season that the bottom 3 will be the 3 that came up, but I think Sheffield United will get better at home. Now Wilder's in there, I think he'll galvanise them a little bit. Burnley, they got better last season in the Championship. You'd expect there to be a little bit of an upturn there. I think Vincent Kompany is a very, very good manager. And I've been really impressed with Luton, and it wouldn't surprise me if they stayed up. I still think Steve Cooper would keep Forest up. But then you've got to start looking at the moment that Forest are the closest towards those 3 teams, which I think will make the owner perhaps trigger happy. And in the owner's defence, he did back him last season and he did keep him in the job, and that was the right decision. So he wasn't as like shotgun happy as he has been in the past. He stuck with Steve Cooper, so he can turn around and say, I stuck with him once. I just feel it's the right time to make a change now. But for the reasons I outlined before, I think it's a huge, huge risk to get rid of Steve Cooper. So I think he would keep Forest up, but I don't think he'll get the chance to do it. I do think there'll be a managerial change probably at the start of the new year. The thing that might keep him in a job a little bit longer is that the games come really fast at this point. So changing a manager when there's a game every few days, teams don't really tend to do that. I just hope for Steve Cooper's sake and Forest's sake, because I really, really like Steve Cooper and I really like Forest as a club as well. I just hope they can pick up some results over the Christmas period, because I don't want to see Steve Cooper lose his job. And I think if he does lose his job, he'll rock up somewhere like Crystal Palace at some point, and I think he'll do an outstanding job there, because I do believe he's a brilliant manager. I just think it's a really, really difficult job, Nottingham Forest, at the moment.
Yeah, it is. Try talking about him every week, Dan. Billy asks on Twitter the very simple question of Cooper in or Cooper out, which kind of leads us, I suppose, on to you, Dave. I know kind of you've always been a huge Steve Cooper fan, as we all are, for what he's done for the club. But at what point do Forest actually say, look, 1 win in 13, could be 14 if we lose to Bournemouth next game? Do you think, as Dan said there, that we'll have a new manager in the new year?
Yeah, I do. Sadly, I do. And, as Dan has said, the portents for Steve Cooper don't look good. And as Dan has also said, he's likely to go somewhere else and make us all kind of think, you only realise what you had when it's gone. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think as a guy, he's a pure class human being. Right? He's had some personal abuse, which is ridiculous. As a human being of the highest order, dignity, integrity, decency. I go back to that night at Fulham. He could have just sort of skedaddled off, but he fronted up and he faced it. I'm sure Sarah was at his press conference after the game that night, and he was absolute class. But I think he's got the next 3 games, and given that the difficulty of those 3 fixtures coming up, I think time's running out for him, and I think a change will be made. I'm with Dan. I don't necessarily think a change will bring about any kind of revolution of the football club, which is going through an evolution at the moment. I mean, if you look at last season, changing your manager brought one result, which was relegation for Southampton, Leicester and Leeds. Sticking with your manager kept another result, which is keeping Forest in the Premier League. Do I think Mr. Marinakis has got the patience? I think his patience will run out. So if we take nothing from the next 3, I personally think Steve Cooper will be done. He'll go with our best wishes, and we'll move on to another era, another chapter of this great football club. And like we all do, because we're all fickle and we're all short term in our thinking, a lot of us, the next guy will come in and we'll get behind him. And then maybe if he loses 4 or 5 games, we'll want him changed. And if another one comes in after that, we'll want him changed. But I think Steve Cooper's sands are running out. I really do. And it saddens me to say that, because my love for him is complete. I mean, there are people saying that he's lost the plot and he's not good enough. Did those people think that at Wembley? Did they think that against Liverpool last year? Did they think that against Arsenal on the last day of the season? If Steve Cooper's become a bad manager, I'd like to know when it happened. I don't think he's been helped by the instability that Sarah alluded to, and Sarah knows the innards of our club far better than I do. And I think he's, as Dan said, I think he's got a hand tied behind his back. I mean, this idea of like players being some of the manager's players and some of somebody else's players, that can never work. If it's not unified off the field, how can it end up being unified on it? So I do think a change is coming. Some want that, some don't. I mean, the level of love for Steve Cooper is actually remarkable, given the way the results have gone. I mean, he's obviously. The thing is, I waited 23 years, right, and I saw a revolving door of mediocrity. That was an embarrassment to Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest were the standing joke about. Forest's longest-serving manager had been there for 23 minutes. It was ridiculous. It was embarrassing to be a Forest fan. That was the stick that we were beaten with. Oh, Forest can't keep a manager. 23 years, and I'm lucky enough to have lived through the Clough era. My dad was part of the scouting staff at the time, so I kind of knew the club to a certain extent, and I enjoyed those years when I was a kid. And I if you'd asked me, I don't know, back in 2016 or 2017 when we survived on the last day of the season against Ipswich, would we ever get to the Premier League? I would have said absolutely not. When are we going to get a manager that we can love and that we can take to our hearts, and who, more than anything, is going to build a rapport from the pitch to the stand? I never saw it coming. And then lo and behold, this guy turned up and he's done all of those things. And I never thought it was possible. And a lot of people didn't think it was possible. So I think that's why there's a great love for him. Unfortunately, we're now at a point where, something I think has to change. Friday night was the first night I walked out to the City ground and I lost my hope, because I kind of thought they aren't good enough. This isn't good enough. And something has to be done to change it. The worrying thing, on top of all these worrying things, like Dan's alluded to, is you might make the change, but you might not actually move any further forward. So, like everything in football, every team you pick, every substitution you make, every £200 million that you throw at something, it is a gamble. Gambles work, gambles don't. Only hindsight will allow you to see, the validity of a decision you make. But I do think his time's running out. He'll go with my love. But, the guy who comes in has got a lot to follow. If he turns it around and keeps it up, fantastic. But I personally think that we're going to need a little bit of it was a miracle to get into the Premier League. It was a miracle to stay up. 30 signings, who gives us stuff? That's what they were singing at Crystal Palace when we were safe. And I think another minor miracle is required based on my particular view of this squad and its ability and its ceiling to keep us up this year, Matt.
And Sarah, I'm just actually reading a question now that we had on Twitter, and it's a very interesting question. Chris asked, assuming that Steve Cooper doesn't survive, whether that was after the weekend or after these festive fixtures, what does the day look like after his sacking? And Cooper much more than a lot of us do, and you've interviewed him, but that's a very kind of question that I mean, it's incredibly hard to answer. But also, I can imagine it will be quite emotional at the football club because of how many relationships he's formed and what he's done for the city and the fans as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's easy to forget now, and it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But when he came in, he galvanised the club. He united it. You forget how toxic it was in the stages before he came in, when it was really looking bleak under Chris Hughton. It was really, really dark times, and Steve Cooper was a breath of fresh air when he came in, changed all that. I think we kind of forget a little bit about that now because of the current situation. I think the day after he goes, or it seems like it's happened, but if and when it happens, the Marinakis family have tended to make sure there's somebody ready to immediately come in. So I don't think we'll see the kind of situation that Stoke maybe are in or other clubs. I think when they make the call, they always have a manager ready to step in. So there won't, very unlikely there would be that period where it's kind of, who's it going to be? They tend to have somebody ready. I'm sure that would be the same. I think it would be a sad day because of everything that Steve Cooper's done. But I guess kind of alluding to the previous points, I think it's a gamble either way. I think it's a gamble to stick with him, but it's also a gamble to change. There's no certainty either way. If you stick with Steve Cooper, yes, he showed last season that he can keep Forest up. There's no guarantee, not at the minute, not with the way that they're playing and with the players that he's got, and without a striker, with two goalkeepers who are struggling to save any kind of or keep any kind of clean sheets. There's risks either way, and it's not necessarily an easy path. It's not an easy decision. Marinakis will know that. He knows the support that Steve Cooper's got, but equally, yeah, Steve Cooper probably could keep Forest up again. Mr. Marinakis wants more than that. That's the crux of it. He wants more than just surviving. He wants to be further up the table. He wants to be in the top 10. He wants to be chasing Europe at some point. Just staying up isn't really going to cut it. And as harsh as that is, and as much as we can all point to the circumstances and the difficulties and the challenges. All of that plays into the results that Forest are getting and the performances and the difficulties that Steve Cooper is having to cope with. Mr. Marinakis has put a lot of money in. He spent a lot of money on signings. Just staying up is not what he had in mind.
Agreed.
No, definitely not. And Dan, in terms of the money that Forest have spent, we asked Tom on the first kind of podcast during the relaunch about where a realistic aim for Forest were, and he said just surviving. Simple as that. Second season syndrome, if you like, just surviving. Do you agree with him? Do you think that this season should just be about survival?
Yeah, I think if you could consolidate in the Premier League for 2-3 years and you get the income that comes with that, if Forest were to go down now, the money they've spent, That's an absolute catastrophe. That's a disaster. Forest would be in probably serious breach of the financial regulations, I would think. I'm no expert on this stuff, but if they drop down to the Championship, if we use Chelsea for an example, who've had a massive turnover of players, they were third, I think, the season before they did all the damage that they've done over the last few years, and they've dropped down to like finishing 10th, 11th. Forest to spend all that money, have that turnover in players, and actually stay up in the first place. I think that's absolutely incredible. So as I said before, Forest are where I would expect them to be. If Marinakis has got designs on 10th, I don't think that's realistic. Teams like Chelsea are struggling to finish 10th. It's a high quality top half of the Premier League now. There is teams like Villa, Brighton, Newcastle, West Ham who are probably going to consistently finish in the top half of the table, added to the 6 that usually finished around there anyway. Top 10 is not realistic for Forest, and I look through that squad of players. For example, the wingers that they bought in Alanga and Hudson-Odoi, good players, probably can go on and be good players, but they're replacing someone who was absolutely superb for Forest last season. But they've never ever had a consistent run of first team football anywhere. They're still developing. If you're expecting players to come in like that and replace players that have left and players that are injured, it simply isn't going to happen. So if Marinakis thinks that Forest should be a top 10 team, I think he needs a reality check, because Forest are exactly where I think they probably, arguably, even a little bit better off than they should be. Because I look at that squad and I don't think it's there in any position. Defence, I think there's perhaps maybe too many players who were very good in the Championship, might not be Premier League players. There isn't that dominant midfielder, and without a 1 year, and they've lost Brennan Johnson, there isn't the goals. Gibbs White and Brennan Johnson took massive responsibility, massive onus last season. When they wanted the ball, it's easy for players to hide in those situations, and maybe that's a little bit of what's happened in the last couple of games for Forest when they've been turned over. Those were 2 players that wanted the ball and made sure they had the ball and drove Forest forward and got them to stay up with a 1 year. I don't really see that within the squad this time. Now, Gibbs White isn't going to be able to do it on his own, and a 1 year's injured. So where they are is where I'd expect them to be.
From that Villa fan perspective as well, Dan, you see that Villa have gone through 3 managers since entering the Premier League, and now got Unai Emery, who is a brilliant name and has done so much for the club already. But at what point especially when you went up with Dean Smith, did you go, actually, hang on a minute, maybe now is time to make that change, as maybe a lot of Forest fans are thinking, and a lot of Forest fans are comparing our situation to the Villa situation. Well, hang on a minute, Villa had to go through Dean Smith, Steven Gerrard, and then now Unai Emery. So at what point did Villa fans actually go, maybe now's the time to make the change?
I think most Villa fans, when Dean Smith got the sack, didn't want him to get the sack. Villa fans were devastated. And there is, there's parallels between Steve Cooper and Dean Smith. Really, the only main difference being that Villa didn't spend as long away from the Premier League as Forest did. So Villa have probably always been a little bit of a bigger draw because they're only away from the Premier League for 3 years. There's a lot of similarities as clubs as well between Villa and Forest, due to obviously previous European Cup victories that we never like to talk about at all as either sets of fans. So Villa had to go through that pain period. Villa had to go through that pain period. They stayed up by the skin of their teeth that first season, and then the second year was all about consolidating. They were better. I think we finished 11th or 12th in that second season. And there's nothing to say Forest won't do that, but there was then that period of consolidation, and then people at the football club started to look above Dean Smith and think, can we get a higher profile manager in? And they got it massively wrong with Steven Gerrard. He was an absolute disaster. He would have taken Villa down. Now Villa have somehow managed to pull in an absolutely outstanding manager who will undoubtedly go down as the best manager I've ever seen at Villa. What Villa are doing at the moment and what they've done since Unai Emery came into the football club. So we were 17th when he took over. Yeah, I don't think Forest can replicate that. I don't think there's an Unai Emery out there. Villa are very, very fortunate that they got Unai Emery in when they did, and that he believed in the project and was backed and has come in. And I can't believe where Villa are compared to where we were a few years ago. So you do have to go through this pain period, and inevitably one day Steve Cooper will leave, and it will be a really sad day for Forest, and he'll go, and even the Forest fans that want him out now will thank him for what he's done. I just don't think in this second season back in the Premier League that's the time for Steve Cooper to go. I think it's when you've consolidated, when there's a bit of stability there, that's perhaps when you change a manager and look to attract someone who's a better manager in that time. Is not now for Forest. That is just going to add to the chaos if you get rid of Steve Cooper.
Yeah, Forest at home to Bournemouth on Saturday, second home game in a row, home to Bournemouth before the Christmas, I was about to say Christmas break, but then Boxing Day with Newcastle at 12:30. I'm sure, Sarah, you'll be looking forward to the trip up there at 12:30 on a on Boxing Day, and that leads us quite nicely into the question that Andy said about who is the panel's first name on the team sheet for the Bournemouth game and for future games. He thinks Ryan Yates, and looking at Ryan Yates and the way he performed and he's a player that just gives it his all. He really does give 110%, doesn't he, Sarah?
Yeah, you know what you're going to get with Ryan Yates, and it's the same whenever he plays. I think you need that kind of player sometimes, certainly in the situation that Forest are in at the moment. Somebody who just plays with his heart on his sleeve, will go into every challenge, every tackle, wins a few free kicks, gives a few away. But yeah, he's the kind of player that is going to dig in, and you need that. He'd certainly be one of the first names. I think at the minute, Nico Williams as well, because he's been playing out of his skin. Since he came in, he's been absolutely brilliant. He's just looked like he's just given a new lease of life. As I said before, he is a wing back. He's not a full back. So the system that Forest are playing at the minute suits him better, which is why they've got to kind of keep with the same formation, really. But he's just been really good. He's defensively been pretty solid. I thought he kept a lid on Son pretty well the other day, but can get forward, put some decent crosses in, sets up a couple of goals. I think he's certainly one of my first names, or will be one of my first names at the moment.
Looking ahead to the Bournemouth game, trying to pluck any positivity potentially out of it, and it's just a huge game this weekend. It's just another big game. I feel like just every time you go into the City Ground at the minute,
they all are.
Yeah, they are. But as well, Dave. Steve Hodge, former Forest player, was saying on the radio that it just feels a little bit different, and there's that nervousness at the minute around the ground. Do you feel that? And of course, the players must feel that as well going into Saturday's game.
You can't help but feel it, Max. We are on at the moment, one win, I think, in 13. We're on a down trajectory as a club and as a family. It's not going well. There's immense nervousness. I go to every game nervous. I always have done. I'm nearly 60, and every game I've been to, I've been like, losing weight as we go along, and then a goal comes along for us, and you kind of think, a port in a storm. But at the moment, I don't know where my port in a storm is going to come from. And this lot who are coming on Saturday, we never beat them. They're our ultimate bogey team. I always feel that our great history, our size, is a weakness against a Bournemouth or a Luton or a Brentford. These teams they do. I mean, it's like, centuries since we were European champions, but they say we're playing the ex-European champions at their big ground, and they get a buzz off it. And this lot, I mean, they're an amazing story in their own right. We were a miracle back in the 70s winning the European Cup. This lot are a miracle because for what, not long ago, they were bottom of League Two with a 17-point deduction. It's incredible what they've done. And I can't see us beating them, home or away. They've just got that sort of, they're the sort of club that a lot of our fans say, no, it's little Bournemouth. But I think they've got better players than us. Solanke would walk in our team. Philip Billing would walk in our team. Lewis Cook would walk in our team. Their goalkeeper would walk in our team. I mean, take the way Forest have played the last few weeks compared to the way Bournemouth have played the last few weeks. And it's an away banker. And let's give credit to Bournemouth, because at the start of Iraiola's reign, it didn't go well. But they, as a club and as a fan base, kind of thought, no, a sunnier upland will arrive. And it's arrived. And they are the form team in this league. Their performance, against Manchester United away was like, wow. It was an eyebrow lifter. The last time I saw a team, I mean, effectively, Bournemouth won 4-0 at Old Trafford because they had a goal disallowed at the end, which should never have been disallowed. So it should have been 4-0. The last time I saw a team win 4-0 at Old Trafford and blow the doors off was Nottingham Forest in 1977. And Bournemouth have just done that. We are not capable of doing that. I see Bournemouth coming and winning on Saturday. I really do, because they're smaller. They're kind of less, less conspicuous than we are, if you like. They are stable as you like. They are the antithesis of what we are at the moment. And I don't see us beating them. If we do, I'll be like, wow, where did that come from? As I've said to you, and it's I know we're coming into Christmas. It's a season of glad tidings, and I don't sound like it, Max, but I can't see us beating them. I think they've got a forward. I mean, I watched Solanke at Old Trafford. He was magnificent. Billing. I mean, I go back to that game. I mean, the last two times Bournemouth have come, they beat us 2-1 at the start of the championship, the promotion year under Houghton, and they were good value for it. And then last season, if you like, I mean, we've had some hurtful defeats since we got promoted, but none was more hurtful than that Bournemouth defeat at home last September. We were 2-0 up and in control. And then they just completely destroyed us second half. And I think they are a more advanced team than us. The table tells you it is. Tables don't lie. It tells you that Bournemouth are better than Forest. And I'd be very, if we beat Bournemouth, I'd be very, very surprised. And if I end up on a Bournemouth podcast this week, I'll be telling them they're going to win. Maybe just writing Forest off completely and saying we've got no chance. Maybe that's the way to go. I don't know, but I don't see it happening this weekend.
Maybe it is. Dan, just finally then, try and spread some positivity for us, some Christmas cheer. I mean, how do you see Forest Bournemouth going? Because it's a real tough run of fixtures as well, isn't it?
I'm going to struggle to give you any positivity because Villa played Bournemouth a few weeks ago and they were very, very good. They've got, when you come across a team and it's either the good time to play them or a bad time to play them.
Yeah,
bad time to play Bournemouth.
Yeah,
at the moment they press so high, really, really good in transition. Just got a lot of energy. They stuck by the manager. Maybe from the outside you couldn't see what they were doing at the start of the season, but everyone was on side. Everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, and they've stuck with him, and they're reaping the rewards of that. I mean, I don't even Billing has been in the team recently. That's how good they've been. I think he's been coming off the bench. Semenyo caused Villa all kinds of problems on the flank. So it's a tough game. Forest are going to have to show some resilience. The only positive kind of thing I can offer is that I've always kind of felt when Steve Cooper needs a result, he gets a result, and at the moment. He needs a result, so fingers crossed he'll get one against Bournemouth. The other thing I will say is that I was at the Forest Villa game in the away end. That day, everything, like the atmosphere. That's probably the best home atmosphere I've heard when I've been stood in an away end. I thought it was incredible from the Forest fans singing Steve Cooper's name all the way through. I kind of feel like Forest maybe need to get back to that. I don't know what it's been like in the other home games, but the fans can play a massive part for Nottingham Forest. Really, really strong set of fans, and when they're singing and they're up for it, that helps the players, and that was one of the major things that helped Forest get over the line last season. So I'd implore Forest fans, whatever you think at the moment, you're desperate for points. Just get behind the manager and get behind the team for 90 minutes because. You did it last season, pulled out results when you didn't expect it. So that's what Forest need over this Christmas period. They need to pull something from somewhere.
Fingers crossed. It would be a nice Christmas present on Saturday, wouldn't it, if Forest can pick up 3 points. That's all then from us. Sarah, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Dave, thank you very much. Enjoy your Christmas shopping this week if you've got any to do. You were saying about your vouchers or something.
Yeah, really, like I say, Max, not at all creative in that department. They're going to get vouchers. I'm really dull, but I hope everybody has a great Christmas. It'd be nice to beat Bournemouth. It'd be nice to beat. Wouldn't it be amazing to come back here on January the 1st and we've beaten Bournemouth, Newcastle, and Manchester United? And I think we might have some different conversations then. Fingers crossed. Lovely to see everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Max.
It's all right, mate. It's what dreams are made of. That Dan, thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. Enjoyed it. Hopefully Forest can turn it around and Steve Cooper can turn it around as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you, everyone, as always, for watching and for listening. Remember to drop us a like, follow and subscribe across all platforms, YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcast. We will see you next week. Thanks, as always, for tuning in and we'll see you very soon. Have a great rest of your week.